So we're going to talk now about adding items and volumes to your catalog and also editing items in your catalog. And we get to start with looking at the best practices. So there's a section for adding volumes and copies, and there's also a section about adding monograph parts. So we're going to hop out and look at the volumes and copies first. So here's that section on adding volumes. Walks you through that whole process so that you know how to do this step by step in Evergreen. I love these screenshots. They make a huge difference for me. I know when I helped put revise the best practices, finding screenshots there and being able to then go look at Evergreen made a lot of difference. And Evergreen looked different from the screenshots at that point, but it was still amazing. Made a lot of difference for me. So it talks about adding classification, and then it talks about the copies in the Add Copies section. So if we go over to that then walks you through that whole process. So you'd add your volumes, then your copies. And there are videos for that. And you can see there's a third video that we're not going to watch today, but it walks you through that process of creating those item templates so that you can have those handy so you don't have to reinvent the wheel every single time you want to put in another children's book or another piece of fiction or whatever it is. So keep that in mind. Another section of the best practices that's handy is add monograph parts. And we're going to talk some more about this sort of stuff as we go this afternoon. So talking about, bless you, when you have a monograph, so a resource that has a specific beginning and end, but it can have multiple parts in it. So something like Season 1 of Downton Abbey, where there's a couple of discs. It's all part of the same record, the same thing, but you could potentially check out the discs individually. Now you have monograph parts, and this walks you through that whole thing and how that works, and that can be very handy because you run into stuff like this where you have one record for the 3 books that go together, but you let people check out the books individually, or you at least want them listed individually somehow in the catalog. So that's a handy little resource there. That's stuff that you can do as item catalogers, but there are things that you can't do. And I wanted to give you a list of the things that you're going to put in a bucket and kick down the road to the bibliographic catalogers. So if there are any fixed fields that are missing or incorrect, this should go to a bibliographic cataloger. So I showed you some of those images earlier. One of the easiest ways to tell if something's wrong with the fixed fields is look at the icons that are associated with this resource and make sure that icon or icons match what you actually have. So if it says it's a Blu-ray but you have a DVD, something's wrong, send it to a bibliographic cataloger. If it's juvenile literature and nowhere does it say that it's juvenile, you probably need to send that to a bibliographic cataloger to fix those fixed fields. If the record seems to have any inaccuracies or problems, so say there aren't any 336, 337, 338 fields, that's generally not a good thing. If the record includes 856 links that are not directly for that resource itself, so basically if it's not an ebook, send that to a bibliographic cataloger because we don't generally want those. They're ugly and they usually don't work. So send those along. if a record doesn't include any subject headings or it has repetitive subject headings, if it says 3 times that it's about frogs, that's not good. If you seem to have multiple records that are for the same exact thing, if a record has the name of the series to which it belongs in the title field in the 245. So with all of those, send them to a bibliographic cataloger. That person will fix that series statement, put it where it belongs, and now things will actually function much more smoothly. So that's sort of the short list of the things where you see this, say something, send it on, it needs to be fixed. I see a hand. Yes?
When you put something in a bucket to do this, is there a way to put a note on it so that somebody isn't having to open it and go through it over and over trying to figure out what the problem is?
Is this possible? No.
Name it a certain way.
So you could give it a title
You
that
mean you're naming the bucket, like wrong icon, the wrong icon bucket.
you could do something like that, like the wrong icon bucket, the series bad.
I mean, if you'd rather send an email with a scan number, you can do that.
Yeah.
And give an explanation of what's wrong with it. I mean,
Yeah, in some way, send this to a bibliographic cataloger. And I like the idea of, having a way to say what's wrong with it. So maybe have a list that you start, and at the end of every week or the end of every day, you take the list and you email it, and it has, like, here are the things that are wrong with these.
Okay.
Oh, boy, we've got to fix.
No, so here in Forsyth County, we have a form. No, so we have a basic form where people can fill out a Google form with a problem they found, and it populates a spreadsheet. And certain people are notified when something new is added. And then you go in and look, there's the problem, you know, PCN is, mark it is, go fix it. You don't have to do a form, you can just do a communal spreadsheet that people have edit access to, and people go in and add to the spreadsheet or add to a document. And people go in periodically, check it, and say, well, this is a problem, you can mark it resolved, however you want to do it that way. It's another way to do it, outside of evergreen.
I love the spreadsheet idea. I mean, how many catalogers love spreadsheets? That's a cool idea. I like that. And then it's all in one place, and people can do things as they can. And you could have ways of marking the spreadsheet, like urgent, or meh, do it whenever. Ignore until last possible second. So I like that idea. So you'll have to figure out, like, with your bibliographic cataloger or catalogers, the best way to put this information out there. But especially if you're an item cataloger now who thinks you might want to move up to doing this later on, think about yourself also, that having that spreadsheet there with those explanations when you move up to bibliographic cataloger in a year or two and none of them have been touched, you'll know what's going on. You know how to remember. So it's, everybody's got a backlog. So this could be a nice way to get around that. But in all these cases, find some way to send these on up the ladder to the next level to get fixed. This one usually gets some people mad, so deep breaths. This is controversial. So, when you have books that have the same content, they should go on a single bibliographic record. This is an NC Cardinal consortium-wide best practice. So hardcovers, different kinds of paperbacks, these can end up on the same record, especially with fiction, but we saw this morning that it can happen with nonfiction too. If it's the same exact book and you've got a hardcover and a paperback, then put them on the same record. This can extend to having different publishers or publisher locations, and to having different publication dates, as long as it is the same content. And that means that also differences in size, pagination, the standard stuff you see with a hardcover and a paperback, that's going to be okay. Now, there are ways to make sure that the differences between these different volumes can be taken into account, and I'll be talking to the bibliographic catalogers about that tomorrow. But for your purposes, as item catalogers, as long as the content is the same, it goes on the same record. There are some exceptions that can point you in the right direction with this. So, different editions definitely do not go on the same record. The exception to this is trade paperbacks and mass market paperbacks. They will sometimes say trade paperback edition or mass market paperback edition. Honestly, it's not so much an edition statement as just a publisher sort of telling you what it is. So trade and mass market don't really count, but any other kinds of edition statements, these mean that this is different content. And remember what I said this morning, first edition is a tricky one. So if the record doesn't say first edition, but your book does, don't worry about it. Put the book on that record if everything else matches up. And vice versa, because first edition isn't printed in every single volume necessarily. But anything else, if you have a special edition or a second edition or a revised edition, these are not the same as something without an edition statement or something with a different edition statement. So those do not go on the same bibliographic record as each other. Different sizes of print. Never, ever, 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 and we're going to talk about this again, put large print on the same record with regular print, because you know your patrons are going to freak. And they are very different things. So large print gets its own record, regular size print gets its own record, and everybody plays nice. And NC Cardinal has large print recommendations, and we'll talk a little bit more about that in just a bit. Any kind of classic literature that has some sort of special introduction or marginalia, notes about reading it, anything like that is different from that same book without that stuff in it. So if you have 3 copies of Moby Dick in your library, 2 of them, one of them's a hardcover, one of them's a paperback, and one of them has like a special introduction and explanations by some guy, then the 2 first ones, just the random, generic hardcover paperback, they can go on the same record, but the one with the special introduction by some guy goes on its own record, just because that's significant. Yes?
We have to add the ISBNs that are random. Like, sometimes I'll find a record and it has certain ISBNs, and I want to add something to it. The content's the same, everything. Am I supposed to add an ISBN or just like not? I know this sounds weird, but
No, it's
something I come across.
We've been talking about that specifically in the bibliographic cataloging workshops, and the general consensus has been that it can certainly help to have those ISBNs, and there are ways to label them so that it shows up what it's the ISBN for. But item catalogers, you guys don't really get to add the ISBNs, so if you've got a different one and your bibliographic cataloger has said, yeah, I'm going to be adding this stuff, then send it on over. But otherwise, it doesn't make a huge difference, but it could help out later on when people are trying to figure out if they should put their book on there too, because now you've just got more ways to match. Exactly. Yes?
In different special editions, like ones with special forwards and
No, because the different contributors in those cases, if it's significant, you may just have like a couple word for word, a couple pages and then it's done. It's like, nah, that doesn't count. But something where some fancy schmancy English professor has done some sort of, the introduction and explanation is like as long as the thing they're talking about, that's going to be something new. So some of it's going to be your judgment. So little bitty things, but if you're getting a fair amount of commentary from somebody, that can be pretty important. Illustrated editions versus text-only editions. These should not be cataloged on the same record. So you've got Harry Potter and the Sorcerer's Stone, and then you've got Harry Potter and the Sorcerer's Stone, the illustrated edition. Those are two different things because those illustrations can be very significant. People can be looking specifically for an illustrated edition, specifically for something illustrated by a certain person. So those should go on different records. If you have illustrated editions with different illustrators, each of those should be a different record because the different illustrators, the content they provide is different. And same thing with translators. So if you've got one of those classics, you've got a Russian novel, you've got Anna Karenina, and you've got 3 copies and each of them is translated by a different person, that's 3 records. Because the translations are going to be different from one another depending on which person did that translation. Yes?
You have 2 audiobooks read by different people, those are also separate?
Yes. Different readers, that can be pretty significant. So yeah, those should be different records. And then if you have different formats, so ebooks versus print books, do not put them on the same record. We may combine our hardcovers and our paperbacks, but we do not combine our ebooks and our print books. They're just too different. So be careful with that one. So those ones you never put together. So you have some different rules here, and I know some people feel strongly about putting certain things together that right here we've said no, don't do that, and others of you feel strongly about, oh my god, my paperbacks and my hardcovers should never be on the same record. But it's a consortium-wide decision that you now are part of, and if it's something you really hate, join the cataloging committee and start lobbying to change it.